The sun had just begun to sink below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and crimson, when a young woman named Eliza wandered along the narrow trail that led from her small frontier town to the forest's edge. She was alone, as she often was, tending to chores or collecting herbs and firewood for her family. Eliza had always been careful, aware of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of the town. Wild animals, treacherous terrain, and the rumors of hostile tribes that sometimes roamed the region. Yet, on this evening, she felt an unusual restlessness, a strange pull toward the unknown that she couldn't quite explain. The forest was alive with the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird, but there was something heavier in the air, a sense of being watched. Eliza paused, clutching her basket tightly, her heart beating faster. She thought of her family and the warmth of home, yet the thrill of curiosity and an unexplainable anticipation kept her rooted. Then, without warning, shadows emerged from the trees. In the dim light she saw him, a tall, imposing figure, his features partially obscured by the twilight and a feathered headband. His eyes, sharp and alert, locked onto hers with an intensity that both frightened and fascinated her. He was an Apache warrior, known among his tribe and whispered about in nearby settlements. Tales of his skill, bravery, and relentless nature had traveled far, painting him as a figure both feared and revered. Yet standing before her now, there was something more, a quiet magnetism, a raw, almost primal presence that spoke of strength and depth beyond mere legend. Eliza froze, unsure whether to run or stay, but the warrior's approach was silent, purposeful, and surprisingly gentle. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of command and an unexpected softness. Though she did not understand all his words, his tone conveyed intention without threat. He gestured for her to follow, and though every instinct screamed caution, Eliza found herself drawn to him, to the aura of mystery and power that seemed to surround him. They walked together into a secluded part of the forest where the trees formed a natural sanctuary. Night fell fully, and the air grew cooler. The warrior, whom she would later know as Dakota, seemed almost ethereal in the moonlight, his movements fluid and confident. Eliza's initial fear began to shift into fascination. She sensed an unspoken connection, a magnetic pull that defied her understanding. There was an intensity in his gaze that penetrated her soul, and though she had been raised to value modesty and caution, there was a warmth in his presence that made her pulse quicken. The hours passed in a surreal haze. They spoke little, for words seemed insufficient, but their silence was charged with meaning. Dakota's hands were strong yet careful as he guided her through the forest, showing her the hidden paths, the way to find shelter, and the gentle art of observation. He revealed glimpses of his world, the customs of his people, the honor he upheld, and the burdens he carried. In turn, Eliza shared fragments of her life, her dreams, and the quiet loneliness that had often accompanied her days. As the night deepened, the distance between fear and desire blurred. The moonlight fell on their faces, highlighting the intensity of their unspoken emotions. In a moment that felt suspended in time, Dakota reached for her hand, his touch firm but tender. The world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the undeniable connection between them. The passion that had been building in quiet glances and fleeting touches finally ignited. In the secluded sanctuary of the forest, under the watchful gaze of the stars, they spent a night together, a night that would bind their fates in ways neither could have foreseen. By the time dawn approached, bringing the first pale light of morning, Eliza was alone once more, her heart and mind filled with a tumult of emotions. She carried with her the memory of Dakota's strength and gentleness, the intensity of the connection they had shared, and a secret that would shape the years to come. Little did she know, this night was only the beginning of a story that would return to her in ways she could not yet imagine. A story that would reveal consequences, love, and responsibility in the years ahead. The first rays of morning pierced through the forest canopy, casting dappled light across the clearing where Eliza had spent the night. She awoke with a sense of disorientation, the memories of the previous evening flashing vividly in her mind. Her heart raced as she recalled the intense connection with the Apache warrior, Dakota. The passion, the tenderness, and the overwhelming sense of destiny were still fresh in her memory, leaving her both exhilarated and fearful. Yet reality intruded quickly. She was alone, and the world outside the forest demanded caution, propriety, and secrecy. Eliza dressed quickly, her movements tense and deliberate. She felt a mixture of guilt and longing, emotion she had never experienced so intensely before. She knew that returning to her family meant concealing what had happened, and the thought of their judgment, or the judgment of her neighbors, weighed heavily on her. The frontier society she belonged to demanded modesty, adherence to social norms, and an unyielding sense of duty. To reveal the night with Dakota would bring scandal, shame, and likely punishment. And yet, the memory of his touch, his voice, and the fire of his gaze refused to fade. Meanwhile, Dakota had returned to his own life. His people awaited him, unaware of the encounter that had transpired under the moonlit sky. As a warrior, he bore responsibilities that extended beyond personal desire. Tribal duties, the safety of his people, and the constant threat from rival factions left little room for indulgence. Yet, he could not dismiss the image of Eliza from his mind. Her innocence, her curiosity, and the raw humanity that shone through her eyes haunted him. He had lived a life of discipline, of duty and survival, but the night he had shared with her stirred emotions he had never allowed himself to feel: longing, tenderness, and a deep, unsettling desire for connection. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza attempted to return to her normal life. She walked among the familiar streets of her town, performed her daily chores, and smiled at neighbors, yet inside she carried the secret of that night. Each glance at the sky reminded her of Dakota. Each rustle of the wind seemed to whisper his name. She tried to convince herself that what had happened was an anomaly, a fleeting encounter that belonged solely to the night and the shadows. But her heart knew otherwise. The bond they had formed, brief though it was, had altered the rhythm of her life. Eliza struggled with a quiet fear as she realized the possibility that she might be carrying a child. A thought sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of dread and wonder. She knew that the consequences of such a revelation could be catastrophic, not just socially, but emotionally. The child, innocent and unaware of the complexities of the world, would embody the secret they had shared. She spent hours walking through the forest again, seeking solace, attempting to reconcile her inner turmoil with the life she was expected to lead. Dakota, in parallel, wrestled with his own guilt. He questioned whether he had acted honorably, whether he had the right to leave her behind, and whether he had disrupted her life irreparably. In the quiet moments between his duties, he found himself envisioning her smile, the softness of her hands, the quiet courage that had shone in her eyes. Every decision he made was now tinged with the memory of Eliza, and he realized that his feelings went beyond mere desire. They had taken root in something profound and lasting. Despite the separation, a subtle connection remained. Both sensed that their lives had shifted irrevocably. Eliza, in her quiet moments of reflection, would feel Dakota's presence as if he were beside her, guiding her through the moral and emotional labyrinth that followed. Dakota, on the other hand, would see her image in the faces of those around. Him in fleeting glimpses of innocence and the laughter of children, and wonder what their future might have been. The months that followed were filled with longing, confusion, and careful secrecy. Eliza tended to her home and family while carrying the memory and the secret of that night. Dakota fulfilled his duties within his tribe, but could not silence the emotional echoes of the encounter. Both lived lives that appeared ordinary to the world, but beneath the surface, their hearts were intertwined by an invisible thread, stretched taut by absence, desire, and unspoken responsibility. It was during this period of separation that the foundations of the story's tension were laid. Neither knew if they would ever meet again. Neither could predict how their lives and the life potentially growing within Eliza would intersect with destiny. The night of passion, brief as it was, had set in motion a series of consequences that would ripple across time, shaping choices, forging challenges, and ultimately binding them together in ways neither could have imagined. 3 years had passed since that fateful night in the forest, and the world had changed for both Eliza and Dakota in ways neither could have foreseen. For Eliza, life had settled into a routine that was both comforting and suffocating. She had returned to her small frontier town, a place filled with familiar faces, dusty streets, and the gentle rhythm of daily labor. Yet, beneath the surface of her carefully ordered life, she carried a secret that weighed on her heart, a secret that colored every thought, every decision, and every fleeting moment of solitude. Eliza had become a mother. Her child, a bright-eyed boy with a curious spirit, was the living embodiment of the night she had spent with Dakota. Raising him alone had been both a joy and a challenge. The community in which she lived was tightly knit, and she quickly learned the art of discretion. People whispered about single mothers, sometimes casting judgmental glances, but she navigated the scrutiny with a quiet strength, never revealing the truth of the child's parentage. She gave him a name, nurtured his curiosity, and poured her love into his upbringing, all while keeping the shadow of Dakota's memory alive in her own heart. Despite the busyness of motherhood, Eliza's thoughts often wandered to him. She remembered his touch, his strength, and the tenderness hidden behind his fierce exterior. The memory of his voice in the moonlit forest haunted her dreams, sometimes leaving her awake long into the night, feeling both longing and sorrow. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, and whether he thought of her as she thought of him. The questions remained unanswered, a silent ache that underscored every day. Meanwhile, Dakota continued his life within his tribe. He had become an even more prominent figure among his people, respected not only for his prowess in battle but for his wisdom and leadership. Yet, for all his accomplishments, he carried an invisible weight. Memories of that night with Eliza surfaced frequently, sometimes catching him unprepared during moments of quiet. Her image would appear unbidden, the softness of her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, the way she had laughed despite fear. He felt a bond with her, a connection that went beyond fleeting desire, a tether that pulled at his heart even as duty demanded his attention elsewhere. Time, they both realized, could not erase the past. Their lives had diverged, yet an invisible thread tied them together. Eliza's child was growing, full of curiosity and energy, and Dakota's instincts as a father whispered to him across the distance, though he knew nothing of the child's existence. The idea that he might have left a part of himself in the world without knowing it both excited and tormented him. He wondered if fate would ever offer a second chance, or if the consequences of their encounter would remain forever shrouded in secrecy. Eliza, too, had learned to live with the tension between secrecy and longing. She had crafted a life that outwardly appeared stable and respectable, yet inside, her emotions were a complex tapestry of joy, guilt, and yearning. Her love for her child was immense, but it was intertwined with an unspoken hope that Dakota might one day reappear. She imagined what it would be like to tell him, to see his reaction, to witness the bond between him and the child. Each day, She navigated the fine line between protecting her family and allowing herself to dream. The years also brought subtle growth. Eliza became stronger, more confident in her decisions, and more resilient in the face of societal pressures. She learned to blend her dreams with reality, to find meaning in the small joys of life, and to channel her love into nurturing her child. Dakota, in parallel, grew not just as a warrior, but as a man aware of the emotional depths that lay within him, depths awakened by a single night that had changed the course of his life. Though 3 years had passed, the story of that night had not ended. It lingered in both of them, waiting for circumstances to bring them back together. Their connection, though silent and unseen, had shaped the decisions, emotions, and inner lives of both mother and warrior. And as fate would have it, the threads of their lives were beginning to converge, preparing the stage for a reunion that would challenge them both, reveal long-hidden truths, and force them to confront the consequences of their past. The foundation for what was to come had been laid, a child who embodied love and secrecy, 2 hearts tethered by an unforgettable night, and lives carefully constructed yet always shadowed by memory and longing. The past was no longer just memory. It was an unresolved story, waiting to erupt into the present. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall grasses of the frontier settlement, painting the dusty streets with a golden glow. Eliza moved briskly, holding her child's hand, her mind occupied with daily tasks, visiting the market for supplies, speaking with neighbors, and keeping a careful watch over her son's endless curiosity. Life had a rhythm now, predictable yet comforting, a fragile semblance of normalcy she clung to. But fate, it seemed, had a way of disrupting even the most carefully constructed lives. As she rounded the corner of the trading post, her steps faltered. The sound of hooves on the hard-packed earth drew her attention, and she instinctively pulled her child closer. There, emerging from the morning haze, was a man whose presence stopped her in her tracks. His figure was unmistakable, broad-shouldered, commanding, yet familiar in a way that went beyond mere recognition. Dakota. Her heart leapt and constricted simultaneously, and for a moment the years dissolved. The memory of the forest, the moonlight, the night they had shared, all came rushing back, vivid and impossible to ignore. Eliza's mind raced. She was unprepared for this encounter, unarmed against the torrent of emotions it unleashed. Shock, fear, longing, and an undeniable attraction collided within her. But more pressing than any personal feelings was the realization that he was about to see her child. Her breath caught in her throat as she instinctively shielded the boy, wondering if she could somehow prevent the inevitable revelation. Yet, deep down, she knew it was impossible. The child, with his bright eyes and gentle curiosity, bore a striking resemblance to Dakota in subtle ways, the shape of his face, the determination in his gaze, the restless energy that marked him as special. Dakota's eyes widened as they fell upon the child. The first moment was one of disbelief, followed by a complex mixture of emotions, astonishment, wonder, and a sudden profound recognition. His gaze shifted to Eliza, searching for explanation, for confirmation of what his heart already suspected. The years of separation, the longing and memory, all converged in this instant, making the world around them seem distant, irrelevant. He approached cautiously, unsure how to bridge the chasm of time and circumstance that had grown between them. Eliza's voice trembled as she addressed him, attempting to maintain composure while internally battling the surge of emotions. "Dakota," she whispered, the name tasting strange yet familiar on her tongue after so long. She feared anger, rejection, or disbelief, yet she also felt a flicker of hope, fragile and persistent, that he might understand. Dakota's voice, deep and resonant, carried a mixture of shock and awe. "Is this?" His words hung in, The air, incomplete yet filled with meaning. The child, sensing the intensity of the moment, looked between them with innocent curiosity. He had no comprehension of the complex history unfolding before him, but he instinctively felt the weight of connection in the air. Dakota knelt slightly to meet the boy's eyes, and in that gesture, a bond began to form, unspoken, immediate, and powerful. The realization that he was indeed the father of this child struck him with a force that left him momentarily speechless. The consequences of that one night years ago were now manifest in the flesh, undeniable and irrevocable. Eliza, seeing Dakota's reaction, felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that he was not angry, not rejecting the child, and anxiety about what this reunion would mean for their lives. The silence between them was charged with emotions too deep for words. They began to exchange cautious dialogue, tentative questions, and guarded answers, as both sought to understand the changes time had wrought. The past could not be erased, but it could be acknowledged, confronted, and navigated together. As the morning progressed, the reality of their reunion sank in. Dakota's presence was no longer just a memory. He was real, tangible, and standing before them. Eliza realized that this encounter marked a turning point, not only in her life but in the life of the child. The choices she had made to protect him, to shield him from scandal and danger, were now interwoven with Dakota's presence. And for Dakota, the sight of his child and the woman he had loved, however briefly, was a revelation, a call to responsibility, connection, and perhaps redemption. By midday, the stage was set for the next chapter of their lives. The reunion had occurred not with fanfare or ceremony, but with quiet intensity, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together in the simplest yet most profound way possible. The consequences of that one night, the passage of 3 years, and the challenges of raising a child alone had all led to this moment, a moment where past and present collided, and where decisions made now would shape the future for them all. The afternoon sun hung low over the settlement, casting long shadows across the dusty streets as Eliza and Dakota faced the delicate precipice of truth. They had retreated to a quiet corner near the edge of town, away from prying eyes, yet even in this seclusion, the weight of years of separation pressed down upon them. Silence enveloped them for a moment, not uncomfortable but electric in Anna. Acknowledgement of the emotions, unspoken words, and secrets that had accumulated over 3 long years. Both knew that the time for evasion was over. The child, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, played nearby, his laughter a stark contrast to the tension between his mother and father. Dakota's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and measured, though it carried a tremor of emotion that betrayed his calm exterior. "Eliza, I must know. This child, he is mine?" The question was simple, but loaded with decades of longing, uncertainty, and fear of rejection. His eyes searched hers for confirmation, for honesty, and for a connection that had been severed by time and circumstance. Eliza's throat tightened. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but the reality of it, the raw presence of the man she had loved and the father of her child, was overwhelming. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He is yours. You were there, and I?" She faltered, struggling to articulate the tumult of emotions she had carried silently for years. Her gaze fell to the child, then back to Dakota, and she continued, "I didn't know if I would ever see you again, if you would accept what happened. But he is your son, and I have protected him, even from myself sometimes." Dakota's initial shock gave way to a flood of emotions, astonishment, awe, love, and a deep sense of responsibility. He knelt slowly before the child, studying his features with careful intensity. Every line of the boy's face, every gesture, every curious glance mirrored him in subtle ways. The reality of fatherhood struck him with a force he had not anticipated, mixing awe with a painful sense of regret for the years lost. He extended a tentative hand, unsure if he had the right, yet unable to resist the pull of paternal instinct. The child, sensing no danger, took it naturally, and in that small act, a fragile bridge of trust was built. Eliza watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered by lingering fear of judgment, fear of future complications, and fear that the past might overshadow any possibility of a peaceful present. She stepped closer, her hand brushing Dakota's, a subtle reminder of the bond they shared beyond bloodlines. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. How could they navigate this new reality? Could love survive alongside duty, pride, and societal expectation? Dakota broke the silence, his voice firmer now, tinged with determination. Eliza, I cannot undo the past, but I can take responsibility. I can be his father, and if you will allow it, I want to be here for you, for him. His words were honest, imbued with a gravity that reflected his understanding of the stakes. Eliza felt a tear slip down her cheek. Relief and hope mingled with lingering uncertainty, but the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. They spoke long into the afternoon, navigating the delicate terrain of reconciliation. Eliza shared the challenges of raising the child alone, the fears she had faced, and the moments of joy that had sustained her. Dakota listened intently, offering understanding and reassurance, acknowledging the depth of her sacrifice. Each word, each confession, was a step toward rebuilding a connection that had been fractured by time but never truly broken. Yet, even amidst this tentative reconciliation, both were acutely aware of external pressures. Society's expectations, tribal obligations, and the looming judgment of neighbors and kin created a tension that neither could ignore. They were no longer two individuals, but three interconnected lives whose future required careful deliberation, trust, and courage. Decisions made now would ripple across their lives, shaping not only their relationship but the child's sense of identity and security. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of violet and gold, a fragile understanding had been reached. They had confronted the truth, acknowledged the child's parentage, and begun the delicate process of rebuilding trust. The confessions of the afternoon, though emotionally exhausting, had cleared a path toward reconciliation. What had begun in secrecy and separation now had the possibility of evolving into acceptance, connection, and perhaps even love renewed. In that quiet twilight, with the child asleep nearby, Eliza and Dakota shared a fleeting glance, a mixture of relief, longing, and determination. The confrontation had not erased the past, but it had illuminated a way forward. For the first time in years, hope seemed tangible, and the promise of a shared future, though uncertain, felt within reach. Days following the emotional reunion were a delicate dance of adjustment for Eliza, Dakota, and the child. The initial shock had given way to tentative routines, moments of laughter, and quiet introspection. Yet the fragile peace they had carved for themselves was under constant threat. Life in the frontier was unforgiving, and the world outside their small sanctuary was filled with dangers both immediate and insidious. Threats came not only from the natural environment, the harsh wilderness, unpredictable weather, and wild animals, but also from human forces that tested loyalty, courage, and the limits of love. For Dakota, the return to Eliza's life brought with it a dual sense of responsibility and urgency. His tribal duties were not easily dismissed. As a respected warrior, he was called upon to lead hunts, protect his people, and navigate complex relations with neighboring tribes and settlers. Yet the presence of his child, a living connection to a past he could no longer ignore, pulled at him with equal force. Every decision now required careful consideration. How could he fulfill his obligations without abandoning the family he had only just rediscovered? How could he protect them from the dangers that constantly lurked in the wilderness and among human adversaries alike? Eliza, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile her growing trust in Dakota with the realities of frontier life. She had learned to survive on her own, to navigate society's judgment, and to shield her son from harm, but the reemergence of Dakota complicated everything. She was torn between fear and relief, between desire and caution. The questions loomed over her constantly. Could she truly trust him to stay? Would he be able to protect her and the child against external threats? Could their fragile bond survive the scrutiny of both settler society and Dakota's tribal obligations? The tension reached a critical point when rumors began to circulate in the settlement. Some whispered about the mysterious warrior's appearance, others speculated about his connection to Eliza and her child. A few men, driven by jealousy, suspicion, or a desire for power, began to observe them closely, testing boundaries and sowing seeds of doubt. At the same time, rival tribes were rumored to be gathering nearby, creating a tangible threat that could erupt into violence at any moment. The settlement, usually a haven of routine and relative safety, suddenly became a place of uncertainty and danger. Dakota recognized that action was necessary. He could no longer rely solely on his reputation or the secrecy of the past. He needed to assert his presence decisively, both to protect his family and to ensure the child's future. He began training the boy in small ways, teaching him to recognize signs of danger, to move cautiously, and to understand the basic skills of survival. Though the child was young, Dakota knew that knowledge and preparedness were forms of protection. Simultaneously, he took steps to fortify their home and strengthen alliances within the community, relying on both his tribal connections and the trust he had begun to rebuild with Eliza. Eliza, too, became more proactive. She realized that survival was not only about hiding or enduring. It was about making choices that could secure their lives. She began advocating for Dakota's involvement, emphasizing his role as both protector and father, while also keeping a careful eye on those who might pose a threat. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of trust, responsibility, and courage, learning to operate as a family unit in a world that demanded vigilance and resilience. Amid these challenges, moments of intimacy and emotional connection emerged. They shared quiet evenings, watching the child play, exchanging stories, and tentatively exploring the feelings that had persisted despite years of separation. These moments were brief yet vital, providing the emotional sustenance needed to face external pressures. It was during these times that both Eliza and Dakota realized the depth of their bond, not just as lovers or parents, but as partners in survival and guardians of a fragile, precious life. By the end of the week, it was clear that the trials they faced had strengthened them. The dangers of the frontier, the scrutiny of the settlement, and the lingering uncertainties of the past had forced them to confront the realities of their situation head-on. Decisions were made. Dakota would remain actively involved in their lives, fully embracing his role as a father and protector, while Eliza would continue to safeguard their home and the child, now with the knowledge that she was not alone. Their partnership, though tested by adversity, had begun to solidify into something enduring, rooted in trust, responsibility, and the shared desire to protect their family. And yet, the future remained uncertain. Threats still loomed on the horizon, and every choice carried consequences that could ripple far beyond their small world. In the midst of this uncertainty, one thing was clear. Their lives were now irrevocably intertwined, bound by love, responsibility, and the promise of the child whose existence had forced them back together. The true test of their bond was only just beginning, as they prepared to face not only the challenges of the frontier, but the deeper trials of the human heart. The weeks following the tense days of reunion and external threats brought a slower, more deliberate rhythm to the lives of Eliza, Dakota, and their child. The initial urgency and fear had begun to subside, replaced by a tentative sense of stability. The frontier, with all its dangers, still demanded vigilance, but within the small sanctuary they carved for themselves, a fragile peace emerged. It was during this time that the foundations of trust, understanding, and shared purpose began to solidify, transforming their relationship from one of necessity into something deeper and more enduring. Eliza found herself watching Dakota closely, noting the care with which he interacted with their child. At first, she had been uncertain, unsure whether he could commit fully to a role he had previously abandoned. But day by day, his actions spoke louder than words. He taught the boy to track, to respect the forest, and to understand the delicate balance between survival and compassion. He listened to Eliza's advice, respected her instincts, and learned the nuances of the life she had built while he was absent. His dedication and consistency began to dissolve the last vestiges of fear she had harbored. And slowly, trust took root. Dakota, in turn, discovered a depth of emotion he had not anticipated. Being present in the child's life brought a profound sense of purpose and connection. Every laugh, every question, every small triumph was a reminder of the night that had brought them together years ago and the life that had resulted from it. But his feelings for Eliza, the woman whose innocence he had first encountered and whose heart he had touched, also grew stronger. He realized that love was not a fleeting passion, but a commitment forged through shared responsibility, mutual respect, and the quiet moments that often went unnoticed. Together, they began to establish routines that balanced survival with family life. Dakota would venture into the forest or perform duties for his tribe, returning each evening to share stories of his day with the child and to assist Eliza with household tasks. Eliza, who had grown accustomed to handling everything alone, now allowed herself to rely on him, to accept help without feeling diminished. This partnership, built on cooperation rather than obligation, became the cornerstone of their renewed connection. As trust and respect deepened, so too did their emotional intimacy. They spent evenings near the hearth, talking of hopes, regrets, and the possibilities of a future together. The barriers of fear, pride, and societal expectation gradually melted away, replaced by an honest and unguarded closeness. Eliza began to see Dakota not only as the father of her child, but as a man capable of love, loyalty, and vulnerability. Dakota, in turn, saw Eliza as a partner, a confidant, and a woman whose strength and resilience had only enhanced her beauty. In his eyes, the child, sensing the harmony between his parents, flourished. He laughed freely, explored the world with curiosity, and developed a sense of security that he had never known before. Dakota's guidance, combined with Eliza's nurturing, allowed him to grow confident and capable, bridging the worlds of his mother's frontier life and his father's tribal heritage. In watching the child thrive, both Eliza and Dakota found profound satisfaction and a tangible reminder that their past decisions, however difficult, had yielded something lasting and beautiful. Yet the path to acceptance was not without its moments of tension. Misunderstandings, lingering fears, and the occasional intrusion of old prejudices reminded them that life outside their small sanctuary could be harsh and unforgiving. But with each challenge, their bond strengthened. They learned to communicate openly, to compromise, and to prioritize the needs of the family over individual pride or fear. Slowly, The external pressures that had once loomed so large began to fade into the background, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and mutual devotion. By the end of this period, it was clear that their lives had been irrevocably transformed. Eliza and Dakota were no longer two individuals bound by circumstance and memory. They were a family, united by love, responsibility, and shared experience. The child was the living symbol of their bond, a constant reminder that even in a world filled with uncertainty, choices made with courage and integrity could create enduring connections. As the sun set one evening over their small home, Dakota and Eliza stood side by side, watching the child play in the fading light. There was a quiet contentment between them, a recognition that the struggles of the past had brought them to this moment. Their hearts, once burdened by longing, fear, and uncertainty, now beat in harmony, preparing them for whatever challenges might come next. The family had begun to rebuild not just their home, but their lives, their trust, and the love that would guide them into the future. The years following the tentative rebuilding of their lives had brought a remarkable transformation. Eliza, Dakota, and their child had not only survived the challenges of the frontier, but had begun to thrive, finding a rhythm that balanced love, duty, and the unpredictable demands of life. Their home, once a place of tension and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary, a place where laughter, learning, and affection were constants. The child, now older, moved with confidence and curiosity, embodying the strengths of both his mother and father, a living testament to the bond that had been forged years ago under the moonlit sky. For Eliza, the journey from innocence and fear to understanding and love had been arduous. She had spent years protecting her child, navigating societal judgment, and silently longing for the father who had disappeared from her life. Now, seeing Dakota as a committed partner and devoted father, she felt a profound sense of relief and fulfillment. The lingering shadows of guilt and anxiety that had haunted her faded with each passing day, replaced by a sense of security and belonging she had never known. Dakota's presence was steady, unwavering, and gentle. He had become a protector, not only of their physical well-being but of their hearts. Dakota, too, had evolved. The responsibilities he once bore solely as a warrior now extended to his family, deepening his sense of purpose. Fatherhood had reshaped him, softening the edges of his fierce exterior while reinforcing the values of honor and loyalty that had always defined him. In nurturing their child, he rediscovered a capacity for tenderness and patience that he had never fully acknowledged. His love for Eliza matured alongside his love for their son, a quiet, steadfast devotion that demanded no words, only presence, action, and commitment. Together, they had forged a family that was resilient, loving, and united by shared history and experience. The challenges of the frontier, the harsh winters, the threats from rival tribes, the judgment of neighbors had tested them repeatedly, but each obstacle had strengthened rather than weakened their bond. They had learned to rely on one another, to communicate openly, and to face adversity as a single cohesive unit. The hardships that once loomed large now served as reminders of their perseverance, their capacity for forgiveness, and the depth of their connection. Their child, the living link between past and present, flourished in this environment of stability and love. He was curious, adventurous, and intelligent, displaying a keen understanding of both the natural world and the human relationships that shaped his life. Dakota taught him the ways of the forest, the skills necessary for survival, and the values of respect, honor, and courage. Eliza nurtured his emotional intelligence, creativity, and moral compass, providing the warmth and guidance that balanced the lessons learned in the wilderness. Together, their parenting created a well-rounded and capable young person prepared for the challenges of life in both human and natural realms. The community, once wary of their unconventional family, gradually came to respect the balance and harmony they had achieved. Eliza's strength, Dakota's integrity, and the child's evident well-being softened even the harshest critics. Their lives became a quiet testament to the possibility of reconciliation, growth, and the enduring power of love. Where there had once been secrecy and fear, there was now openness and mutual respect. Their story, born from a night of passion and secrecy, had evolved into a narrative of responsibility, courage, and hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the landscape, Eliza and Dakota sat together outside their home. Their child ran ahead, laughing freely, exploring the small fields and woods that surrounded them. The parents watched in quiet contentment, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. Dakota's eyes reflected pride, love, and an unspoken gratitude for the twists of fate that had reunited them. Eliza's gaze was tender, her heart full, no longer burdened by fear or longing, but enriched by the depth of their shared life. In that moment, it was clear that the journey fraught with danger, longing, and difficult choices had led to a life rich in meaning and connection. The night that had begun in secrecy, passion, and uncertainty had given rise to years of growth, love, and family. Their child was not only a symbol of their past but a promise of the future, carrying forward the legacy of love, resilience, and courage. As twilight settled over the land, the family stood together, a unit forged by experience, strengthened by adversity, and bonded by an unbreakable connection. The past had shaped them, the present sustained them, and the future, though unknown, was embraced with hope, confidence, and unwavering love. In the vast wilderness and the small community they called home, they had found not only survival but a lasting happiness that would endure across time, a testament to the enduring power of love, responsibility, and family.